As much as I love this time of year, I'm always reminded of one of the worst memories of my entire life. I've always been an outdoorsy type of person. Any chance I had to be outside, I took it. Whether it was hiking, sports, being at the beach, you name it. If it was outdoors, I was there. Now, back in high school, which at this point was around 10 years ago now, my parents signed me up for this trip with the school. They were doing this camping and hiking program, and we were going to take a weekend trip to the mountains. I loved the idea for a bunch of reasons, mainly because we were getting out of class on Friday. I was able to talk a bunch of my friends into going as well. I was so excited to spend the weekend in nature with my friends and just sort of not care about the world. Friday came and we hiked a decent chunk of this local mountain. It wasn't that bad, and I honestly think the trail was designed for beginners. Around 5:30, we decided to set up camp. There were probably about 15 students and 3 teachers. The first night, my friends and I, who were all sharing a tent, got in trouble by one of the teachers. There was a strict lights out policy by 10 p.m. and we were still very awake and active at that time. One reason why I was able to convince my friends to go was not just the no school thing on Friday, but because we could play with our Nintendo DS's in the tent. Pokemon X and Y versions had just come out and we were all playing together. And if you can't guess, we were very loud playing the game and the teacher made us turn them off. We were upset but listened to them, and I didn't sleep well that night. I could hear all kinds of noises outside of the tent. It could have been an animal, but I thought it was the teacher checking up on us throughout the night. The next morning, I was exhausted, but once we got hiking, I got into a groove and felt pretty good again. During the day, one of my friends suggested that we sneak out of the tents at night. I didn't love the idea because I hated breaking the rules, but I just really wanted to play my new game with my friends. Nightfall came once again, and we told everyone that we were hitting the sleeping bags early. It was around midnight, and I was nearly asleep when my friends woke me up to sneak away. I was groggy for a little while, but the thrill and excitement woke me up eventually. I did realize how stupid it was to sneak out in the middle of the woods at night, but I didn't think about it like that. My logic was that we weren't doing anything that bad or illegal, so the repercussions wouldn't be too severe. We walked a good distance away from the camp so we wouldn't wake anybody up. Most of us had a nearly full charge on our DS, so we said that we'd play until the DS's died and then we'd head back. The first 30 minutes were great. I felt like I was making an awesome memory that I would cherish forever. Unfortunately for me, I was about to make a memory that I would remember forever, but for all the wrong reasons. After that first 30 minutes, we heard rustling in the trees, and we all froze. My first thought was maybe a bear, and I was terrified. I didn't know what I would do. A few seconds later, a person emerged from the trees. It was jarring and unexpected, and honestly just weird. He didn't look at us, and he didn't say anything. We were all sitting on some tree branches, sitting in an almost semicircle, and the strange man sat in our circle. The man looked to be maybe in his 40s. He was an average build with mostly dark hair that was slicked back. He was clean shaven, but most notably he seemed to be wearing some pretty nice clothes. I will say that it was pretty worn and dirty, but it was still a pretty nice outfit for a strange man in the woods. None of us said anything, and we kind of just looked at each other, almost paralyzed. We didn't say anything to the man either. He just sat there on the tree stump, essentially looking down at the ground. We all looked at each other and silently agreed to just get up and make our way back to the campsite. We silently counted to 3 and stood up. And as we stood up, the man stood up as well, but still stayed completely still. He didn't look up yet, and he didn't seem to be hostile. It was almost as if though he was sort of just mirroring our movements. His standing up was the final straw for us, though. We freaked out and decided to run as fast as we could back to the campsite. I started, and everyone followed. I looked back a few times, and I could see that he was lightly jogging after us, at least I think. And this was one of the worst things I'd ever seen with my own eyes. This sort of just emotionless man in the middle of the woods, seemingly chasing after us but not really trying at the same time. And his lack of emotion, even when chasing, was just so disturbing. He never seemed to sprint, and thank God we were able to lose him. At least, we thought we did. We zipped our tents quietly, and we all agreed to not tell anybody. I don't know why. We were stupid when we were kids, and we were just scared that we might get in trouble. We stayed awake the entire night, jumping at every little tree branch snapping and wind gusting. We had never been so happy to see the light of the morning. We hiked out of the woods that afternoon and never saw the man again. Since we're now safe, we figured that we would still never tell the teachers about what happened. We didn't get caught for sneaking out, and we never got hurt by that weirdo in the woods. I wanted to tell someone, but one of my friends talked me out of it. Basically, if I got in trouble, all of us could have gotten in trouble, so they thought it was best to just sort of sweep it under the carpet. And I guess I'm lucky nothing worse happened. We absolutely should have told the teachers, but at that age, the idea of just getting in trouble seemed worse, and now that I'm older, not a fall season goes by where I don't think about that weirdo in the woods.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This incident happened when I was visiting West Bengal, which is a state in one of the South Asian countries, India. Being new to this place and English being my first language, I couldn't understand what most of the folks there were saying, and nor were they able to understand me. There were a few young people who knew how to speak English, but my southern accent was not that much of a help. So when I was talking to this young guy, I don't know what part of my speech or accent went wrong on his ears while asking about the most flaunted regions of the state, but he looked a bit shocked as if he wasn't expecting that from me. I remembered being in Darjeeling at the time, which was a beauty all on its own. Despite being a guy who travels to a lot of different countries, I had never seen such a breathtaking scenery before. I don't mean to offend anybody, each country has its uniqueness, but those who have been there before would be able to understand what I'm trying to say here. Anyway, when the guy gave me directions of what seemed to be a hill situation, I figured he may have misgotten what I had asked him. Instead of taking me a taxi or any other mode of transportation, I decided to hike to the place. I was confident that I'd be able to withstand the journey. It took me about 8 hours to reach there. And when I did, I was met with a young-looking guy wearing a white shirt and gray pants. He introduced himself as Raj and asked me if I needed a guide since he was one. After walking straight for 7 hours and 45 minutes, my confidence had taken a bit of a toll, so I decided to give him a chance and accepted him as my guide. There were a few problems with understanding his pure Indian accent, but he seemed fluent in the language itself. So it was better to have someone like him alongside me if I needed to engage in a conversation with another Indian. I was thirsty and hungry. He also started to take me over my senses, so I told him that he would move forward after I quenched my thirst and fill my belly. He nodded in response and went off to somewhere where I took a nice spot to eat whatever I'd bought up. I took out potato stuffed thick tortillas that I bought earlier and started eating them. Felt too spicy for my taste, but I still loved the combination of flavors mixed in this. I took out one of the bottled waters and emptied its content in my stomach. When I was done eating, I rested a bit before walking any further. About a half hour later, Raj came back and asked if I wanted to look around. I was still tired, but since I didn't want to waste the young boy's time any more than I had, I got up and started following. He started walking me into the woods and telling me about many historic things about the place that I found quite interesting. As we were walking further, I couldn't help but take notice that I hadn't seen a single soul besides this guy ever since I stepped foot there, so I asked him why there weren't people around the area. It's because they're scared to come this time around. I felt the wind being weird as he said that, along with his pace getting slower, but thinking it was just my imagination, I asked him, "What's so scary?" There wasn't any response from Raj's side. Even his footsteps had disappeared, which only gave my heart a sinking thump along with a tightness in my chest. I didn't dare turn around, but I had to in case I was wrong, so I hesitantly turned, only to see there was no one there, and Raj had suddenly disappeared into thin air. The woods were pitch black, and the only thing I had was my phone's flashlight since Raj was the one carrying essential stuff. Started calling out his name while saying that if it was some kind of prank, it wasn't the slightest bit funny, but there was no response. Not knowing what to do and where I was, I started to run in whatever direction when I felt someone following me. Thinking it must be Raj, I turned around, only to find an old woman in Indian attire. I thought she must be one of the locals and might know which direction leads out of the woods, so I started asking her questions. I tried to speak as slowly as possible for her to understand me, but when she said in response shook me even more, since I knew for a fact that the language she spoke was neither Hindi nor this state's local, because I have heard many of those languages and I haven't heard a single person speaking in the dialect she used. She then gave me a blood-curdling smile, which terrified me to my core, and I started running in the opposite direction of her. Luckily, I was able to run out of the woods and stumble across the same guy who told me about Dow Hill this morning. But as I was too spooked to be able to speak a word, he went ahead and started speaking in his slow Indian accent. Even though I told you about this place since you asked me about a haunted area, but I couldn't sleep worrying about you, so I came. This isn't the kind of haunted place you could come to like this. I was too scared to correct him that I never asked for a haunted one in the first place, and this was all because of a simple misunderstanding. But still, I silently followed him. He had brought a taxi with him, which was parked in a distance. He then took me to his home as a guest and insisted that I stay the night. His family was too nice. They offered me multiple different dishes to eat, and each one had an entirely different flavor. Even though I had a little spooky experience, the love this family showed me weighed more. Arav, you know about the guides who work here? I asked the next morning as I was exiting his house. Yeah, a few of my friends work there, so I know almost everyone, he said with a cheerful smile. One of the guides whom I met yesterday disappeared all of a sudden. His name was Raj. I gave him the description of what he looked like, but he looked at me with the same expression he gave the other day I met him and said, I don't believe someone like that works there. I'd have to ask my friend if he is someone. I used to work for the Chico County Sheriff back in the mid-90s. Chico really in the middle of nowhere, the poorest place in the entire state of Arkansas. But when I was a deputy, there was never more than about 10,000 people in the entire county. It was and still is the kind of place that people drive through without a second thought. But I thought about Chico a whole lot. I think about it every day. Sometimes it's all I can think about, no matter how much booze I sink or how many pills I take. And back in the fall of '96, Chico started to become flooded with a kind of low-grade crystal methamphetamine that was called crank or biker meth. High-grade meth forms crystals, hence the name, but the low-quality stuff is just a powdery white substance that can burn up the user's throat because of the stuff it's cut with. We were finding that junk everywhere. It was decimating the poor folks out there. It was in the schools and the bars, even in the churches. We arrested this one kid who'd been awake all weekend and had sat there twitching in the pews until the collection plate came around. Didn't even care that people saw him take the money either, and was too messed up to even have any means of a getaway. Violent crime skyrocketed in the space of about 4 months. Things were getting out of control. We were picking up tweakers from all over that were making pilgrimages to Chico just to spend their money on the cheapest, dirtiest crystal we at the department had ever seen. I put cuffs on guys from Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, even as far away as Indiana. The county sheriff even got a call from the governor, who demanded something be done about it all. And as you can imagine, all that fecal matter rolled straight downhill. But we had no idea where this stuff was coming from. Anyone we picked up for selling wouldn't talk about who they got it from, no matter what we threatened them with. And they were like crystal commandos. And from my experience, that's just not like tweakers to cover for each other. They'll do anything to stay out of jail, because it usually means a forced detox. But these dealers, they kept their mouths shut. Like they were full-blood mafia, like Crystal Nostra or something. Like they were more scared of the guy selling it to them than they were of us. We bagged one guy with 6 pounds of the stuff, and it was me that drove him over to the county for booking. Afterward, I went back to my car, and there was all this might have caked onto the floor and into the back seats, my cruiser. I mean, it was everywhere. I smelled real bad, and I was livid that he had made such a freaking mess. But then it hit me. All that mud had come from somewhere, right? By the looks of it, we managed to bag the guy just as he gotten the re-up from his connection. So wherever the sky just came from was muddy, real muddy, like maybe somewhere out near the Mississippi or one of the lakes out here in Chico. I decided to take a drive just to see what I could see. Maybe a little walk to have a feeling took me besides. What's the worst that could happen? I found our crystal cooks and brought them in for the big win. Well, as it turns out, that actually was the worst thing that could happen afterwards. I never be the same again. I spent a lot of time fishing with my pa when I was a kid. That's pretty much all there was to do in Chico, a county of over 40 separate lakes and reservoirs, and I've been to almost all of them. Most of the shorelines are shale or sandy soil, but one particular shoreline is pure mud when you're going to lose your shoes in if you don't have the foresight to wear rubber boots. And it has the infinitely creative but descriptive name of Mud Lake. And it was Mud Lake that I decided to take a drive to that afternoon. The lake itself isn't too popular with fishermen, not unless you're looking for some monster catfish, and those things can be much more trouble than they're worth reel in. So has some trace in the edge of his own foot. I thought it was pretty strange to see a trail of smoke wafting up through some trees around the other side. I mean, was faint, real faint, and maybe if the wind had been blowing just a little, I'd never seen it at all. But it was eerily still that day and just as quiet. It took me about 20 to 30 minutes of walking, but I traced the edge of the lake, right around to the rough area, could see the smoke. The closer I got to the source, the more I began to smell this disgusting, putrid stench, almost like a mix of rotten eggs and cat urine. I almost noticed that patches of what would have otherwise been healthy plant life had started to die, like whatever I was closing in on was death itself. How no life could survive near it. I thought about turning back a few times, but eventually came across when I was only described as a suit, use of wood panel and corrugated iron shacks. I know I should have called out to see if anyone was home or announced myself as a deputy and demand that whoever was inside should come out. But the feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach just seemed to stop any words from coming out of my mouth. Cops don't go by the book all the time, especially not small-town deputies like me. Besides, I couldn't hear anything coming from inside any of the shacks. And aside from the small campfire burning in a clearing between the shacks, there were little signs of human inhabitation. See, I push open the door to one of the shacks with my .44 drawn, and immediately recoil at the fumes that come out. And never actually seen a working meth lab before, but I didn't need any narcotic expert to tell me that's exactly what I'd just seen. There was all kinds of trash strewn around in their discarded packaging, from cold medicine, batteries that had been cut open, used coffee filters, and what wasn't included, all the improved glassware set up on the small table that I had heard stories about how bad they'd smell from all the chemicals being mixed up in them, which must have been where that cat pee smell was coming from, and backed off from the shack, coughing and sputtering, feeling nauseous with my eyes streaming. I felt awful, but at the same time, kind of elated. I was almost certain that I had found our meth cook. It was only when I searched the other shacks that I began to feel really freaked out. The first one was evidently some kind of sleeping area. The 2 camping cots set up on either side of the shack. The only thing was, they didn't look used at all. They were covered in the same kind of trash that was strewn about the lab shack. Gas canisters, tubes of what looked like rock chemical ingredients. Whoever used those shacks obviously didn't sleep much, if at all. There were also rows of dollar bills all over the place. These guys weren't taking care of the profits at all, it seemed. Either they were making too much money to account for it all, or money just didn't matter to them. And that was a terrifying prospect to me. Whoever was flooding Chico with crank wasn't doing it for the cash. They were doing it for some other reason entirely. But it was the things that were written on the wood wall panels that really got my attention.
All kinds of weird phrases and symbols have been scrawled on the walls, and what appeared to be black marble pen. Stuff and chicken scratch handwriting so bad I could barely make any of the words out that were interspersed with skulls, difficult looking things, and little black stars. I backed out of the second shack and went to check on the third, which was by far the worst one of all. There was another rotten smell coming from behind a flimsy wooden door, but this one was from something very different to a meth lab. And when I peeked inside, I almost puked from how bad it was. Surrounded by yet more piles of trash and money was a big old wooden stake that looked like it had been driven into the ground as deep as it could possibly go, and tied to that wooden stake was the most mutilated dead body I'd ever seen in all my years of police work. Whoever it was had been dead for a while, but they hadn't completely decomposed yet, and there were so many flying insects and maggots crawling all over their face and body that at first it kind of looked like they were moving.
I'm not sure how much damage had been inflicted while they were still alive, and I pray that most of the mutilation had been done post-mortem. But the look of agony of the corpse's face made that almost impossible to imagine. The poor saw that had been tied to that stake had been scalped, had one of their eyes removed, had teeth pulled, fingers cut off with the stumps looking like they'd been cauterized to stop them from bleeding too much. There was deep, dark-looking patterns of cuts across their face that suggested that they'd been carved up in a kind of ritualistic way while they were still alive. The same kind of black burn marks on their finger stumps were present on the torso and thighs, to looking almost like cigarette burns, but like they'd been inflicted by something bigger. There were many other wounds on the body that would have required a coroner to really be able to tell how they were inflicted. But one thing was clear to me: whoever this was had been tortured, maybe even to death. Then read his "I'm about to turn around the head" back to my cruiser and radio the whole thing in. I hear something moving through the trees behind me. I spin around to see the filthiest backwoods monster I'd ever seen, just walking through the trees in nothing but boots, a pair of urine-stained white briefs, a shin holster with what looked like a hunting knife tucked into it, and a gas mask. He had some kind of AR variant slung over his shoulder too, but luckily I had my .44 trained on him before he could react and reach for it. I told him not to move, right, put it down, and at first he starts raising his hands nice and slow. All I could see of his face was the cold, dead gaze that stared back at me through the misty clear plastic eye holes of his gas mask. There was just nothing behind them, like they were a doll's eyes or something alive but non-alive. Man, I heard something move behind me, and I figured it must have been his partner or whoever the second camping cot belonged to. And for just a second, I was dumb enough to give this guy my back out of fear that his partner was trying to sneak up on me. But it must have been a possum or something running through the woods, because there was nothing there when I turned. And by the time I looked back, the guy in the gas mask was unsoldering his rifle and preparing the fire. I let off 3 shots at him, and I'm pretty sure I missed every one. In return, he let off an automatic burst of his rifle that ripped up the shacks behind me, and somehow, either from the poor vision of his mask or the recoil of the rifle, managed to miss me to Nixon, I know. I'm running through the trees, trying to see the trunks cover in between, looking for a solid position to return fire. I can hear the sky barking like a rabid dog while he's chasing me, and I fire 3 more shots in a running gun battle that leaves my .44 empty. He replies with another burst of his rifle, and although it didn't feel like I'd been hit right away, I suddenly found I wasn't able to run anymore. Like I suddenly lost all feeling in my right shin. A human makes this mudded whipping sound like he must have seen me go down and realized one of those shots that hit the mark. But from the lack of follow-up fire, I figured that he too must have been out of ammo. I didn't see any spare magazine on him, and he was half naked after all. But he didn't have the knife on him, and I could hear him hollering about how he was going to use it on me as he took off after me through the trees. The whole time, I'm reloading my .44. I'm thinking about the state of the body back there in the third shack, and how he'd have all the time in the world to work me over. Just as I'm assuming he had done to the poor soul that was tied to the stake, that was the most afraid I'd ever been in my entire life. Every single other emotion pales in comparison to the intensity of that fear. I was shaking so bad I could barely load my revolver. Even with the speed loader, I could barely manage it. But somehow, I did. Rolling once my back and aiming just in time to see the monster coming through the trees, me with his knife in hand, I pull all 6 bullets into him, and then watch them collapse into the dirt like a sack full of rocks. It wasn't over though. I still had to crawl back through the mud and the blood to my cruiser, and I had to sneak past the cook's dead body in order to do so. The whole time I'm crawling past him, I was expecting his eyes to just open suddenly like a horror movie or something, for him to roll onto my back and plunge that hunting knife into my neck. While I was trying to crawl away, every second was drawn out of my heart racing as I tried to keep one eye on the guy and one eye ahead of me. But he didn't wake up. No one just gets up after taking 644 slugs to the chest. I was retired on medical grounds not long after. Doc said the bullet that hit me fractured when I hit the shin bone, and there's been a piece of lead still stuck in my right leg ever since, meaning I now walk with a permanent limp. But that's just the physical scarring of what I went through that day. Sometimes, I think the mental after effects have been way worse. I barely slept a wink for months, and if I actually did manage to drift off after drinking myself into a stupor, the nightmares would be enough to have me waking up screaming, having soaked the bed sheets with cold sweat. I got so bad that my wife couldn't sleep in the same bed as me until hours upon hours of therapy sessions gave me some small measure of closure. I thought for a while she might divorce me, because the man that came back from Mud Lake just wasn't the same as the one that drove out there. I'm doing much better now. Me and the wife are still strong together, and we live down in Florida quite comfortably thanks for the compensation I got from the government. I got a Medal of Valor from them for something most guys would keep on display somewhere, but I keep that thing locked away in a drawer. I figure maybe if I write something like this, it might help process what happened back at Mud Lake, thinking that it might help me get past it. My therapist thought it might not be a good idea, and I told him I'd rather just forget. But I know that it's not possible that the memories of Mud Lake will stay with me until I'm as dead as the cook in his gas mask.